Hello friends, my name is Nick and this week's plant of the week is Asparagus setaceus, also sometimes listed as Asparagus plumosa, and it's commonly referred to as the common asparagus fern. And while this is commonly referred to as a fern, an asparagus fern, this is not a true fern, this is an asparagus. This is much more closely related to the asparagus that we eat and purchase at the grocery store, which I think is a fun little fact about this houseplant. However, you're more than likely going to find this in the fern selection at your local houseplant stores. And this is quite an underrated houseplant. I feel like this isn't like the hottest houseplant on planet Earth because it doesn't really sport those big beautiful leaves that we are used to seeing on some other houseplants. It has this just fine frilly foliage, but I just think that's even more the reason to love it. There's really not a lot of houseplants that give off this vibe, and I completely understand why it's commonly referred to as a fern. It really does give off that appearance. But even though, like I said, you'll likely find these hanging out in the fern selection wherever you do your houseplant shopping, it is important to understand that these do have quite different care needs than many of the ferns that you're going to find in said fern selection. So for starters, the light for these plants, you would be surprised that these really do require a good amount of sunlight, especially in comparison to ferns. I have always grown my asparagus in a windowsill, whether it be a north-facing window, an east-facing window, a south-facing window even in some cases. I've always found the best of luck. Sorry if you can hear my cat going a little crazy this morning. These have always performed best for me when I have them in a bright light setting inside a windowsill. Every time I've tried to pull these away from a window, I haven't had the best of luck. I've had either the leaves get a little bit yellow or a whole frond turn yellow and fall off. It just hasn't been a great plant for me to grow in those conditions. However, I could imagine that this being a plant that once you acclimated to the conditions that your home has, say you introduce it to your home in a bright windowsill, you could probably pull this back up to like 6 feet afterwards and still have it grow decently well for you. Watering wise, I do find myself watering my asparagus ferns decently often. That is probably something to do with the fact that all of mine are planted inside terracotta planters, which sucks the moisture out from the soil, so it does cause the soil to dry out quicker. But another factor in that is probably the roots of these houseplants, which are very tuberous. It literally looks like they have like fingerling potatoes like growing in their soil. They get really robust, and I've even heard that they can break open planters, which is why I plant them inside inexpensive terracotta planters, just in case I let them go a little too long. I do not know what the threshold is, but every time I've repotted my asparagus ferns, they are very root bound, and there's a whole harvest of those potatoes down there. They are not edible, don't eat them. Not that I'm expecting any of you would. But I feel like because those roots are just so vigorous and robust, that they suck a lot of the moisture out too. They're processing the water pretty fast. So these are definitely thirsty houseplants. But on the flip side of things, I think they are also very drought tolerant, especially in comparison to ferns, which I can't help but keep comparing these to regular ferns because most people seem to think that these are ferns, which, like I said, they're not and have very different care. So that's one of the main points that I'm trying to drive home in today's video. As for the soil though, I just use standard houseplant soil mix. I think I've added a little bit of perlite in here, maybe a little bit of charcoal as well, but this really just looks like a standard like peat-based potting soil. I know that this asparagus fern has been planted up in here for a couple of years now. Now, believe it or not, because I know this is just like 5 fronds coming out, but this is the second time that I have cut back my asparagus fern completely. And as I mentioned, they have these very tuberous roots that store a lot of energy. A really good thing about that is if you let your asparagus fern go a little too far, maybe you have fried it in the sun a little too long without watering it and the leaves have turned like kind of yellow and gross, or maybe it's just dying on you for no apparent reason, you have no idea what's going on. You can see pretty clearly in the base of my pot here that I have cut this down, like I said, on 2 different occasions. This is the second time I'm letting the plant regrow. But I just cut it down completely to the base. I just throw it in a bright area, keep watering it, and honestly, within like a week or 2, it's very, very quick to bounce back. It starts putting off new fronds from the base of the plant, and I think I cut this back like maybe 3 months ago at this point, and you can see it's already a cute little adorable plant. So, of course, not nearly as full as probably the ones you're going to be bringing home from the houseplant stores, but just kind of an idea of what might happen as the years go on, as this does get very big, beautiful, and lush, but as it is, you know, frilly and can be, I wouldn't necessarily call it temperamental, but every now and again, some of the fronds are going to turn yellow, and it's going to drop needles like you're shaven. But it always seems to get to a point after a couple years where I just find myself cutting it back, which is probably my fault. It's probably negligence. I'm sure that you can continue to grow this plant for years to come. But I'm just reassuring you that if you purchase one of these and you're on the struggle bus with it, just cut it back and you might be surprised how well it recovers from that. I also really just love the like bonsai appearance that these kind of give. They're just like a natural bonsai looking houseplant. Not in the sense that they're going to form a trunk or anything like a true bonsai would, but they just kind of really give off like that aesthetic that many bonsai plants would, and would definitely complement bonsai plants if you are very into growing bonsais, or if you would like to get more into that aesthetic. But I really just love this for just the very woodlandy vibe that it has. If you watch me here on YouTube, you know that I'm a sucker for these houseplants that are just frilly and look like they could be growing out of a crack in the sidewalk or lush in the forest here in like the northeastern United States. So totally fits my vibe. And another thing I should mention along with the whole fern comparison dealio is that ferns, on one hand, are non-toxic to animals, but asparagus are moderately toxic to animals. So not going to send your pet to the vet, I would assume, if it takes a bite out of these leaves. In fact, I don't really expect that this is something that animals would be really, I mean, I could be very wrong, but like my cat, not that she chews on my plants, but she's never been interested in this. And my old roommate's cat, who was much more interested in chewing on plants, was never interested in chewing on these just little baby needle leaves. Speaking of needles though, these do get little spines along the stem. You wouldn't really expect it because it looks just so lush and frilly and like you could just like rub your face in it, but along the stems, they do get these little kind of like spikes or thorns that are kind of more akin to like a rose thorn or a little pricker. So one thing to keep in mind there, they are pretty sharp. They run like downward, so if you like ran your finger up this way, you would not be going well, but if you run your finger down the stem, it's not an issue, but they will catch you if you're running your fingers upwards on the stem. So just something to be mindful of. Been there, worked in the houseplant store. I've learned this the hard way, but it's just one thing I do keep in mind of. But they're not scary thorns. They're not really something you need to be worried about. Just know they're there when you're handling the plant. I don't think you're going to have any issues with the temperature or the humidity if you're growing your asparagus ferns inside. If you are growing them outside, just keep in mind they don't like being below like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So just use your best judgment depending on what area you live in. You can do you. But in their natural habitat, these grow in a warm, more humid environment. I'm pretty sure these are native to southern Africa, so they will thrive in a warmer, more humid environment, but the standard household humidity is totally fine. I have not supplemented humidity in many moons here in my home, and I have been doing just fine, keeping in mind many of my houseplants have been in my possession for a couple years now, so they have acclimated to my standard household humidity, but this is not one that has given me any issues. In fact, this is quite a common houseplant, and some of the more common houseplants that you're going to find at your local houseplant stores for a decent price and in prevalence are prevalent for good reason, because they're easy houseplants to grow, and this definitely falls into that category. Propagating these, you know, I've never really thought about that. I'm sure you can divide these if you go inside the soil and like divide some of the houseplants that you purchased the plant with, if you have just got it, or if you've grown it out over time and it's starting to grow off more vines. I'm sure it's going to produce more plants here and there, maybe some pups. Honestly though, I haven't really noticed any pups on mine, so maybe I'm misspeaking on that. But I don't think, oh gosh, I should have done my research. I don't think you can cut this off like with a stem cutting like you would do like a pothos vine. I think this is all something you're gonna propagate by division. But to be honest, I probably just wouldn't propagate your asparagus fern and just leave it be and let it become a full lush bush, because if you need to get another one, they cost like $7. So whatever works for you, but I'm sure an experiment is worth trying out. But anyway, that's gonna do it for this week's plant of the week. Asparagus setaceus, also sometimes listed as Asparagus plumosa, like I said, but just commonly the asparagus fern. Super lush houseplant. I really just love its vibe. Totally gives you that woodland vibe. Definitely gives you a break of those like tropical houseplants that we are most used to seeing. So thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Philly Foliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.